gonna record. We're back today. All right, so we got some people coming in. All right, good. So today we're going to be talking about the immune system. So I don't have as many pictures today to go through, but I think it's going to be important to kind of share my screen a few times here. So bear with me there. Now, we're going to be talking about the immune system in a different context today than you're probably used to. One is because the immune system on its own, it's technically not really a system. It's a bunch of parts that kind of come together. They're not physically connected, right? So we call the digestive system, it's a bunch of organs that are kind of connected in a lot of ways. So, you have the stomach, the intestines, you have the pancreas, you have the liver and gallbladder. They all kind of feed into this. We have the urinary system, which is the kidneys and the bladder, and they're connected through ureter. We have the nervous system, which is the brain connected to a spinal cord. The lymphatic system doesn't necessarily have all of its organs, quote unquote, connected. Although if you take into account that lymphatic vessels are everywhere, you can kind of see it. Now, when we're talking about like specific lymphatic vessels, I think a good general place to start is, for the most part, the lymph vessels are going to follow your arteries and veins. So if you see that kind of like branched, image where you see the red arteries and the blue veins kind of throughout the body, if you Google a picture of that, the lymphatic system loosely follows that, because they're all going to kind of go to the same places. Now, why is that the case? Well, you have to remember, and we'll dive into this more later, that we have two main fluid systems in the body. We have the blood, which only accounts for like 20%, and then we have the lymphatics, the lymph, the interstitial fluid, you might hear it called. That's actually 80% of the fluid in your body. And that's going to play a big role in the immune system. So this is going to include things like, say, your tonsils, your thymus gland, your spleen, as far as organs, along with the lymphatic system as a whole. So lymph nodes, these can all be, quote unquote, organs, part of the immune system from a structural standpoint. We have lymphoid tissue in a lot of places. So I'm sure you've heard me say the lymphatic system, 80% of it, of your immune system, is located around the gut. This is gut-associated lymphoid tissue that lines the intestines, because that is the interface between humans and the outside world. So that's kind of like where they come in. So there's a lot that goes on here, and they all play a role in the immune system. And I'll kind of show a picture of kind of what that means in a second. But what's important is we have to define, because we have to work in the rules of definitions of what is health and what is illness. Health is essentially, I like to call, like how your genes are expressed. It's not necessarily the genes themselves. We already know this, that your genetic makeup as a whole makes up very little as far as your actual health outcomes. It is how those genes are expressed, how they interact with the environment. And then health is also like how you adapt to the world around you. So this could be blood pressure, it could be bowel function, it could be emotionally how you cope with things. It could be a lot of things. It's how you adapt to stressful situations. And we have three main types of stress. We have physical, chemical, emotional. So how you adapt to a world that's always flowing, that's always changing. This is a beautiful concept in Chinese medicine, the concept of yin and yang, right? So, it's always looking for balance. That balance is always moving. It's never still. It's trying to find stillness in a world that's always changing. And that's kind of like the beauty of nature as a whole. That's actually how we grow and get stronger. We become more resilient. Illness, sickness, generally speaking, has two main causes. It's toxicity or acidosis, or you could call like a deficiency. You're not necessarily getting all of the things that you need. So those are essentially like, that's where illness comes from. It's because we don't have the ability to find that balance. Now, when we're talking about the immune system, there's a lot that goes on to it, and I have a definition here that I want to share. So I'll share my screen quick here. And I kind of like this definition. So this is what we're going to go with. It's the bodily system that protects the body from foreign substances, cells, and tissues by producing an immune response that includes especially the thymus, spleen, lymph nodes, and special deposits of lymphoid tissue like in the bone marrow and in the GI tract. So the lymphatic system includes all of these different systems. We just talked about a few of them, right? We have the circulatory system, the skeletal system, because the bone marrow is actually going to play a role in our immune system function. We have the digestive tract, of course. That's where most of our immune system is going to be located. The nervous system is going to be a huge part of this too. Why? Because that is essentially our stress response. When we are in a stress, the fight or flight state, that's actually going to downregulate your immune system, because we have to run away from the tiger. We need to fight to survive, whatever it may be. That's essentially what's going on there. And then we have, of course, the lungs and respiratory tract. Why? Because, again, this is how we interface with the external environment. So you'll notice we have the circulatory system and the respiratory system. Why? Because that's how we get oxygen into the body. So we need to process whatever comes into the body in an external way. The gut essentially is all an external environment. Why? Because it's essentially a tube that has one end out the front and one end out the back. And everything inside of that tube can be considered outside of the body, if you think about it that way. And that is where our microbiome is. That is where all these things that actually help us are really located. So that, I think having that context is really important. And, you know, it's one thing to like understand this and know it. And it's another thing to take advantage of the body's innate wisdom. And just because we don't necessarily understand it, what we do know is that as human beings, we have an innate ability to heal. And we're just beginning to like understand and learn this. Now, I talked about the physical, chemical, emotional stresses, and I want to talk about them a little bit more here. So I actually created this graphic because I've seen a bunch of them, but I don't necessarily like the ones that I've seen. So we're going to use mine today. No, I'm not going to do it that way. So I'll share my screen one more time here because this is important. And I'm actually going to put this in my courses because it's kind of fundamental. So you call it the triad of health, whatever you want to call it. There's three sides, obviously, of a triangle. We have a structural or physical end. We have a nutritional or chemical, and we have a mental, emotional, spiritual. So those are the three sides of the triangle. And the base of the triangle, as you'll notice, is the structure. So how you carry yourself, injuries, what are some things that can help, you know, and you know, some modalities that you might look to if you're trying to get to the bottom of whatever's going on in that area of the triangle. So I wanted to make it like as holistic as possible here. So the structural side, you'll see you have chiropractic, acupuncture, massage, physical therapy, muscle techniques, structural integrity. So strength, flexibility, your ability to work with your body and keep it as healthy as possible. Reflexology, dentistry, all of these would fall under the physical side of the three-sided triangle. The nutritional or chemical side of it. So this is going to include, you know, your organ and tissue function. We talked about some of those before. We have hormone imbalance, right? Your glands. So the chemical system in your body, which is your hormone system at the end of the day. Nutrition, what you're putting in your body, what you eat, drink, think, put on your skin, and breathe, essentially. Although the think is going to be here. But the other four, what you eat, drink, breathe, put on your skin, that is the nutritional chemical side of the triangle here. So, you know, nutrition, herbs can come in, acidity and toxicity, we talked about that, homeopathy, allopathic medicine really just addresses this side of the triangle and usually brings with it some negatives that go with it too. But I included it because that's just to get an idea. Then we have the mental, spiritual, and emotional side of the triangle, which is the think of those 5 things I mentioned. So what's going on here? Like, what are some remedies, or what are some things that this includes? This is essentially your day-to-day mindset, your attitude, your general outlook on life. This could be dealing with things like emotional blocks, which is why I like using something like the emotion code. That could also fall under energy medicine, potentially. All those other things like NET can do it, talk therapy can do it, color and crystal therapy certainly can do it, chakra balancing, acupuncture certainly kind of can fall into this line too. So acupuncture kind of plays a role both in the structural and the energetic, spiritual side of things, which I always find fascinating. But this is kind of like what you're looking at the end of the day. So understand that if there is illness, if there is breakdown in the body, it is coming from one of these 3 sides of the triangle. That is it. These are the sources. So I hope that's clear. So now that we got that out of the way, I'm going to talk a little bit about, like, what are we doing? Because what we're noticing is we're getting sicker, not better. We now live in a world where as of, I believe it was 2018. I think it was 2018, that they surveyed a bunch of military leaders actually here in the US, and they reported that 70% of Americans aged 17 to 24 would be just off the bat unfit to serve in the US military because of obesity, asthma, hearing and eyesight problems, and or mental illness. That is kind of scary if you think about it. And we also know that roughly half of the United States kids between the ages of 13 and 18 have been diagnosed with at least one mental, emotional, or behavioral disorder. And that number is going up, usually in younger kids too. We also live in a world where 1 in 2 folks will get cancer, 1 in 5 have an autoimmune disease. 1 in heart disease is responsible for 1 in every 4 deaths. 1 in 10 have a form of liver disease. 1 in 20 are depressed. 1 in 3 seniors die with dementia. It has become so common that I see people are like assuming like, oh, we just kind of, our memory just kind of goes when we get older. No, this is a new phenomenon. It's not even a phenomenon. This is new because of what we're doing to our environment and our body. 40% are diabetic. 74% have a chronic digestive disorder. 74%. That is 3 out of every 4 people have a chronic digestive disorder. So when you hear me hammer this home every single time I come on one of these lives, is that the gut is at the root of most problems that we have. This is the reason. Modern science is literally just catching up to this. And these are things that people like Hippocrates talked about thousands of years ago. The gut is the root of most disease. We're literally just relearning what people have known for thousands of years. We don't need to wait. This is what's happening. 60% of adults have at least one chronic disease, and 54% of kids. And right now, it's somewhere like 1 in 30 boys have autism. That number is going up. So that is huge. Now, the emotional component, I want to talk about this. I did a post on it earlier this week, but it's important to kind of share this here because there is an energetic component, particularly to the digestive part of it. And I want to touch on that because the digestive tract is important when it comes to the immune system. Why? Because I already mentioned it, 80% of the immune system is in the gut. So certain emotions can affect your digestive organs as well. So the kidney, bladder, fear is the primary emotion that goes along with that. The liver, gallbladder, it's usually anger or some sort of derivative of that. So hatred or being bitter. These are all kind of derivatives of liver, gallbladder. The small intestine, it's usually about abandonment, insecurity, maybe heartache or like lost love. The brain, the nervous and endocrine systems. Usually jealousy, overwhelm, humiliation, pride. These are all things associated with that. The stomach and pancreas. This is worry. So your big time worriers are usually associated with the earth element. This is your anxiety, nervousness. You know, you get upset stomachs, worried when you're eating. This is something that goes along with it. And then usually the colon, large intestine, is associated with grief, rejection, sadness, sorrow. You know, things that will kind of lead to that pseudo kind of like depressive state, but usually from a lens of grief, holding on to stuff. So if you're not able to release that, both emotionally, it's going to back you up physically. Why is this important when it comes to the immune system? Because you need to eliminate the waste in your body. If you're not eliminating it, that's going to put your immune system in to essentially do double duty. Because if you're not, for example, having at least one bowel movement a day, those toxins are going to be able to get reabsorbed through the colon. That means your liver, your kidneys have to do the work again to try to get rid of these toxins, because it is literally sitting inside of you. So, you know, holding on to stuff, holding on to rejection or discouragement or grief are all going to really, really, really bring an issue, create an issue as far as getting the bowels moving. So there is that emotional part of the triangle that affects you physically. So, you know, your brain. So your brain is also going to play a really large role in your immune system. So, for example, we have the lymphatic system. You could look it up. You basically sell lymphatic with a G. You have the lymphatic system. So this is your lymphatic system essentially in the brain. And we already know that the brain, what are some of the things that can affect that? Obviously, what you put in your body from a nutrition standpoint, physical trauma can, to a degree. Prescription medications absolutely do. Anything that has to do with heavy metals, whether this come from injectables, certain environments, anything, water potentially, all are going to affect the brain. Heavy metals love fat tissue, and we know that the brain is largely made up of fat tissue. So heavy metals love burying themselves there. Hormonal imbalances. Why? We have the hypothalamus in the brain. That's essentially the command center that does communication between the nervous system and the endocrine system. So we have the electrical side, the chemical side of messengers essentially in the body. Endocrine disruptors can certainly do that. Why? Because it's going to mess with your hormone imbalance. So think things like cosmetic products, like glyphosate, like plastics, all of these, cookware, all of these things that can be disruptive to your endocrine system, your hormone system, going to be an issue. This is why you're seeing particularly a ton of hormonal disruption in plenty of women due to things like PCOS, things of that nature that are causing hormone imbalances. That way, on the male side of things, you're seeing testosterone levels generally way, way down from what they were 40, 50 years ago. This is because of introducing things like glyphosate, of being exposed to more plastics on a daily basis. The conventional food supply literally has chemicals that are going to alter your hormone balance in your body. So you're wondering why fibroids or PCOS or PMS are so common, and you're wondering why you know, testosterone in males are much lower. It is because of this estrogenic effect of all of these poisons, essentially, that we're exposed to on a regular basis. Breathing, absolutely a big part of it. Breathing is one of the only ways that we can control our autonomic nervous system is our breath. It's one of the only conscious, I should say, conscious inputs that we have. This is why I always talk about consistent nasal breathing in and out through the nose. Cookware. So if you actually go on my page, I actually like Extrema. They have a ceramic cookware that I enjoy. I also think cast iron's good, and depending on the quality of stainless steel, that could be good too. When you're talking about storage, ideally glass is going to be where you want to go. Obviously, this takes some time, slowly go in that direction. I have basically all I use at this point is that ceramic from Extrema, and I use cast iron. And cast iron, generally speaking, you could get at a really nice price point. It'll last you forever if you take care of it. I've had one cast iron pan, and that has lasted me years. And then I have a cast iron Dutch oven, like a pot. So for if I'm making like a soup or something like that. That's it. You don't need to overdo it. Don't need to overthink it. Great question, though. So that's a part of it. The brain is going to be a part of it. But then we have the gut. And I know I've talked about this a few times already, but I got to fix something before I keep going here. Is the second brain, which is the gut. And the gut, bear with me, I'm just trying to fix my page. So we've known about this. This is actually what changed my concept of how the body works. This was maybe almost 10 years ago at this point. I read a book called Gut by Dr. I think her name's Julia Enders. You can look it up. Fantastic book, easy read. But what she talks about is how this ecosystem inside of us literally creates our thoughts, creates how we feel, and affects all things like allergies, emotions. It's really fantastic. But we know that this gut-brain axis is real. It's literally the second brain. And in some ways, I would say, is our first brain. And, 2015, have a study here. The interaction between the microbiota and the gut-brain axis appears to be bidirectional, namely through signaling from gut microbiota to brain and from brain to gut microbiota by means of neural, endocrine, immune, and humoral links. What does that mean? It means that the brain is literally sending signals to the gut and vice versa. Now, what it doesn't say here is that 90% of those signals go from the gut to the brain. So the sensory input, the information input is going to the brain from the gut. So this is why many times when you'll hear folks talking about particularly depression and anxiety. Now, obviously, things in the physical world can lead to those types of things. But when you're talking about serotonin production, 95-ish% of it is in the gut. Dopamine production, 50-ish% of it is in the gut. This is from our microbiome, our microbiota. It has to get up to the brain. Can you start to see how, if this is off, if the gut is not functioning properly, if we're constantly exposed to antibiotics, and if you say, hey, doc, I'm not taking antibiotics. Well, if you're consuming conventional foods every day, you're having a little bit of antibiotic through, say, something like glyphosate every day. If you're using something like conventional sunscreens or cosmetics, these are going to disrupt the skin flora, where you have things like candida that you need to keep your body clean and healthy. It's can you start to see how this is an issue? And this is why leaky gut is such a huge issue. So there's a Nobel Prize winner back in 1913, Charles Robert Richet. Quote from him I got here. We are so constituted that we can never receive other proteins into the blood than those that have been modified by digestive juices. Every time an alien protein penetrates by a fraction, the organism suffers and becomes resistant. So you hear of leaky gut. This is this affects the gut, but also the digestive juices get shut down. So many people have issues with stomach function, right? Maybe they have reflux, and this is an issue, a stress issue. There are other things. We talked about the emotional aspect of it. But say if you're have an inadequate stomach acid supply, you're getting reflux because the pH is not as low as it should be. The stomach should be very acidic. It's an acidic chamber. So you're getting reflux. What do? You take antacids, which actually lower your production of hydrochloric acid even more. Problem is, you actually need that you need that hydrochloric acid for quite a few things here. So things like breaking down, getting rid of outside microbes, because remember, things that we don't want in the digestive tract. Why? Because again, the digestive tract is an outer environment. It's an outside world. So letting things in that would or killing things off that would otherwise not be there could be an issue. This is why you see so many folks who might be struggling with something like SIBO, because the stomach is not doing its job because it does not have the gastric power, whether due to stress, which is going to lower your capacity to make hydrochloric acid in the short term, or you just have chronically low levels from, again, things like medications, et cetera, that are going to really cause an issue. So keeping this microbiome safe and ultimately functioning properly is so key. You know, because we have 100 trillion bacteria like inside the gut, and it's an ecosystem. See, we are actually, the nature is fractal. So we have an ecosystem inside of us. Each human being is an ecosystem in and of itself. As a collective, we create an ecosystem maybe called a neighborhood or a city. And then you have an ecosystem called, you know, a state or a country. And in this ecosystem that we call a biome, that we call a planet. So you can see how exponentially all of these things actually repeat at different levels. And you can also see how, as human beings, microbes actually outnumber us 10 to 1. 90% of the cells in our body are not actually human. They're microbial. 99% of the genetic material is not human inside of us. So every time, you know, you blame yourself for like, you know, oh, it's this MTHFR mutation or the COMT mutation or this BRCA gene that is the cause of your problems. Remember that your genes total are less than 1% of the total genetic material inside your body. And then also remember that if you were to count up all the genes in a human, you get roughly 20,000. And then a flea that you would find on your dog is about 30,000. So think about that, because if we're 50% less complex from a genetic standpoint than that of a flea, then we need to seriously reconsider what is potentially causing the issue. So let's go back to the immune system and what's going on here. So we have the innate immune system and we have the adaptive immune system. So the innate immune system is essentially inherited from the environmental exposure from your ancestors. So this is the thing that gets passed down onto you. The adaptive immune system is going to be based on the physical, chemical, emotional stresses that you're exposed to. And they both have humoral, or from the blood, or cell-mediated components. So, you know, we have the skin as far as players here. The skin is the first line of defense. So it secretes things that are acidic or oily to keep certain things out. We have saliva that has antibacterial and antimicrobial properties of its own. We have stomach acid, which we already talked about a little bit. We have intestinal flora, which again is an ecosystem. So keeping that up and running is crucial. And we have mucus in mucoid membrane. So when you hear people talk about parasites a lot of times what that could be are actually mucoid plaques that are called ropeworm, which are essentially mucus plugs in the digestive tract. Most times when people do cleanses, they might not see this. Usually I see it, it's when people use binders. So binders aren't necessary. There's a separate conversation. I don't love using binders with a lot of people. You might see some stuff come out, but generally with binders, you'll get the larger things. It doesn't mean that these things aren't coming out. It just means that they tend to get clumped together. So I hope that makes sense. Then we have phagocytes. So these are cells essentially that eat things for the most part. We have macrophages, which macro, they're big cells. And what they generally do is consume. They eat things. They swallow things. We have basophils. And basophils are the things that release histamine. You also might see them with parasites, same thing with eosinophils. Then we have antibodies. So antibodies are essentially proteins which are created by certain white blood cells. Each antibody can, as far as we can tell, binds to different antigens, which are foreign things. And they essentially act like a tagging marker. They mark certain things, ideally for destruction, if they're not self. We also have like an inflammatory response. So like, and this is important because everyone talks about inflammation as being inflamed is always a bad thing. We actually need inflammation in certain parts. For example, like if you cut yourself, or if something else is going on, you need to have inflammation to a degree. So if you say cut yourself, what happens is you're going to get inflammation going to that area. This is usually brought on by things like histamine, like we just talked about. This would be in the form usually of mast cells, which are the same things as basophils, but they're in certain tissues, whereas basophils, they're basically in the bloodstream. You're going to have other things that are going to cause dilation at the scene of the crime, so to speak. And what this dilation does is it brings heat and it brings more white blood cells, particularly phagocytes like neutrophils. And these things essentially start doing the cleanup of what's going on. They're taking care of whatever the insult is and bringing more to that. Then we also have different types of lymphocytes. And there are, generally speaking, the three major types of lymphocytes. We have T cells, B cells, and natural killer cells. So natural killer cells, as far as we know, play a role with viruses, which are a story for another day on their own. But what we know is at least what we think viruses are when they're around. We have these things called natural killer cells that are activated to help at least clean up the area. Keep it as vague as possible with that, because the concept of viruses is interesting, but there are many theories behind that. And today is not the day we're jumping into that. But then we have T and B cells. So these are the ones that recognize specific antigens. And then once they've ID'd them, they create a response to eliminate that specific outside invader. So this is where sometimes your antibodies come in. So if you have an antigen, they could be tagged with an antibody. That antibody initiates essentially a response, and it gets neutralized by different types of white blood cells. There's a lot of steps in between that goes on. To be perfectly honest, I don't think even like the world-class immunologists know exactly all the steps of how this works. But from a broad picture, this is our best understanding of it. Another way we can kind of look about it is we have a Th1 versus a Th2 response. So Th1 immunity is usually more responsible for things like in our environment. So pollen, dandruff, dust mites, food, chemicals in the environment. This is your Th1. And your Th1 response is generally kept healthy by your gut flora. This is why, again, most of your immune cells are found in the gut, is because that is the major portal between the body and the outside world. That's why it's so close to that. So if your gut flora is off, if you had antibiotics, if you're consuming a lot of dairy, refined foods, processed meats, if you're consuming a lot of conventional foods in general, processed foods, all of these are going to create abnormal gut flora. It's going to disable your Th1 response. Some of the things that I really like that are really helpful in managing that are going to be things like astragalus, are going to be things like echinacea, ginger, broccoli sprouts, elderberry. All these things are fantastic for Th1 response. Now, this is where we have to talk about injectables for a second here, because essentially what they do is bypass Th1 immunity and go straight for Th2, which, for simplicity's sake, is the antibody response in the body. So the concept behind injectables is that you stir up enough of a ruckus in the body that you can create an antibody response. That is big picture, very high level of like what's going on. So, not obviously a ton of detail there, but that is essentially the goal. Now, what happened initially with them is because they essentially were not getting an immune response. So what they did was they started adding heavy metals like aluminum to them to kick that response in, which is kind of wild if you think about it. But that's ultimately started the way that we got to where we are today. There's a lot of steps. I don't know if the end of COVID is still going on, but if you haven't checked it out, I would highly recommend checking out some of that. It will go into that in much more detail. I have time to get to today. My buddy Alec put it together. There's some really good information there. Leave it at that. So essentially, you're trying to bypass Th1 immunity, but the problem is you actually need it. And this is why, in my opinion, that we've seen so many people with abnormal immune system dysregulation going into this system. Because if you're constantly bypassing Th1 immunity, you're setting yourself up for abnormal immune responses because you never actually had that initiation step. You're essentially skipping it. So this is why you're seeing things like autoimmune diseases that were basically non-existent 100 years ago. All of them pretty much did not exist. This is why they're so prevalent now, in my opinion, is because we're constantly messing with the immune system, that now when things are coming into the environment, we have a pre-programmed response that isn't necessarily what would happen if you just let it happen as is. So this is why so many folks have gut issues. This is why so many folks have inflamed tonsils and autoimmune issues, lupus, psoriasis, everything down the road, type 1 diabetes, anything in the autoimmune spectrum, rheumatoid can fall under this. And it's tough. It's really tough. Because I didn't mean to go down this rabbit hole too much, but it's important to understand this because this affects the immune system the rest of the way. Now, I will say, if you have inflamed tonsils, for the love of God, please do not get them removed. We do not come with organs that are, disposable. Gallbladders are not disposable. Appendix is not disposable. Tonsils are not disposable. The reason that they get inflamed, it is a sign that your immune system is functioning abnormal, not even abnormally, probably overworked, because there's something going on with the system. Treat it as a warning sign. Start with getting rid of the super acidic inflammatory stuff I already talked about. The dairy, the refined grains, the processed meats, all has to be is step one. If you're not at least doing that, then like you have to zoom out and start that way. And it's mostly because a lot of the stuff has been tampered with. Thyroid, exactly, not an optional organ. They're not optional. We don't come with optional pieces. That's just not what happens. Nature does not make mistakes. When we see things that we can't understand, we tend to blame them on genetics. But what's really happening, and time will, I truly believe this, will bear this out, is that there is something in the environment that we are doing that we're either not aware of, or we're not taking seriously enough, and it leads to downstream effects that are much worse. And we tend to blame that on genetics, but that's not really what's happening. It is essentially a toxicity or acidic overload to some degree that is affecting not only the person, but sometimes the offspring. And beyond that, we already know this happens with something like Bt toxin. If you look into it, this was years ago, I believe in like the 70s. They were doing studies, they followed folks basically from generations through generations, and at least to the third generation, they were finding Bt toxin from the first person who ate the cow that ate the corn that had the Bt toxin in it. So it survived the cow's digestion. Cow gets slaughtered. The mom has whatever it is, survives the mom's digestion, gets passed on to the baby, the fetus. The baby has it. And then not only that, that baby can pass it on to their offspring too. That is one toxin that we're aware of. And the studies aren't done on this type of stuff. So it's important to understand. Generally speaking, that was a long tangent. I got to keep this under an hour, so I'm going to try to fly through the rest of this. But generally speaking, we have 5 major antibodies. I'll talk about 4 of them right now because they're kind of the big ones. IgE, generally speaking, is your immediate immune response. This is your allergic response. You have IgG, IgM, and IgA. These are more delayed immune responses. IgA specifically is for the gut. So if you've ever gotten a gut test done, you'll usually see a marker for secretory IgA. That's what that is. And then IgG and IgM are your primary class of antibodies that are found within the body. Viruses, I'm not going to jump too much into this because we're running out of time, but what is important is that our DNA, our actual genetic makeup, is 45% viral by nature. So if viruses did not exist, you would not exist. Just think about that for a second. So hopefully that gives you an idea of like at least this concept of germ theory that is probably not true. I actually found a study back in 1968, believe it or not, in the Lancet. I'll pull a quote out from it. So the germ theory of disease, infectious disease, is primarily caused by transmission of an organism from one host to another. So we kind of know how it does. But however, the germ theory has become a dogma because it neglects the many factors which have to play a part in deciding whether the host germ environment complex is to lead to infection. Among these are susceptibility, genetic constitution, behavior, and socioeconomic determinants. In other words, the environment is going to affect your resiliency. So, and so this is like a really, really big problem. And think about it for a second. Like, if you see a pile of garbage and you see flies flying around it, did the flies create the garbage? Or did the flies come because there was garbage there? If you see a burning building on fire and you see a fire truck out front, did the firemen cause the fire? Or are they there to clean it up? Do you see a little bit of what's going on? Even Rudolf Virchow, who I know we talk a lot about Louis Pasteur, but Rudolf Virchow was another one who was kind of really big into germ theory. And he had a quote: "If I could do my life over again, I would devote it to proving that germs seek their natural habitat, diseased tissue, rather than being the cause of disease." What does that mean? It means that parasites, what we call parasites, which is an umbrella term for fungi and molds and opportunistic bacteria. There aren't really bad ones. There's opportunistic ones. They thrive. They are nature's cleaners. Nature does not like recreating the weak. This is where the parasite kingdom comes in. The fungi kingdom come in to take care of what's dead and rebuild anew. We see this in nature all the time. Like if you see a tree fall down in nature, it ends up getting decomposed, brought back into the soil, and what happens? New plants, new trees grow on top of it. It's to work against that is very silly. So, and this is essentially what the body does too. So like if we're sick, if there is an illness, what happens? We get fever. Fever is important. Why? Because for every time you double, every degree the body rises in body temperature, the speed of the immune system doubles. So let's say you're 98 degrees, 99, it's going to double. 100 degrees, it's going to quadruple. At 101, it's 8 times faster than it is at 91. So this is exponential. Talked about fractals earlier, right? You get to 102, it's what was I at 8? So 8 times 8, 64. Well, double actually. So it'd be 16. So I got to check my math. So fractal fractal. Think about that. Nature is fractal. These things happen for a reason. We get increased mucus production. Why? Because invaders need to be walled off, and then we have to kill it. Where does that happen? We have the neutrophils, we have the phagocytes that we talked about. We have to eliminate it. This is why we need to have our elimination pathways open. You're seeing it. We cough, we sneeze, we go number one, we go number two. We also, when you're sick, you notice you probably are not as hungry. Fasting is a way for the body to actually cleanse itself out. This is why when you are sick, you are not as hungry. It's because you're cleansing whatever that is out of you. Your body is telling you, hey, we need to pump the brakes on throwing more in because we need to clean. Then what do? You restore and rebuild. This is where the pH, the lymphatic system comes into the immune system, is because we have this pH balance in our body. And generally speaking, it's 7.4, 7.35, 7.45. Does not deviate from that. You have death on either side of that. So it has to be kept in that range. If it gets too acidic, which most people do, we go to the bone bank, we get calcium, we get magnesium, we get different minerals, sodium, potassium, iron. These are alkaline in nature. To buffer that, to bring it back. So you wonder why we have so much osteoporosis. We have magnesium deficiency, so cramping, tightness, issues with sleep. It's because these minerals, sometimes it's an intake thing. That is true, because we're not consuming foods that are high in that, although with calcium, that's not really the case. But with magnesium, it could be. They're getting used up because we're in this acidic environment. It's because if you're looking at the standard American approach to eating, it is the burgers and the fries and the pizzas and the pastas and the dairy and the cheese, and all of this is acidic. When ideally we should be consuming at least like 80% alkaline foods on a regular basis. At least 80%. Those are primarily going to be your fruits and vegetables, seeds. You can see how this acidity builds up. And what happens with acidity you can equate with inflammation. Inflammation is essentially heat rising. It clumps things together and it creates heat. That's what acidity is. Now the kidneys come into play. Why? Because this is where your lymphatic system is going to drain. It's going to drain through this. So, and you could check this, like your ideal urine pH should be slightly acidic under 7, somewhere between 6 and 6.5. You could actually test this with pH paper. So you could go, if you have a pool, you probably already have pH paper. If you don't have a pool or something you test the pH of, you could find this at a lot of different stores. You go on Amazon and find pH paper. You could actually test it. If it's more acidic, that's a problem. So, you have to check that. So, but again, a lot of the things that we consume are acidic. Soda, for example, yes, it's sweet, but like your Coca-Cola has a pH of somewhere between 2.5 and 4, usually. That's very acidic because remember, the potential for hydrogen scale that goes from 0 to 14, it's not linear. So it's actually exponential. So if you go from 7 to 6, that's actually 10 times more acidic. You go from 6 to 5, that's 100 times more acidic than 7. It's not 2 times. So it's important to kind of understand that difference because these are large degrees of difference here. Other things that are acidic, a lot of things we take to deal with pain, NSAIDs. This is why some of the side effects you see with them, GI bleeds, blood pressure issues. Why? Because you're messing with A, the kidneys, but B, that electrolyte balance that you would use to keep things alkaline, sodium, potassium specifically. But also we know, ironically, one of the nutrient depletions with NSAIDs is what? It's calcium and iron, which are both alkaline in nature. So I hope this is starting to make sense. PPIs are linked to osteoporosis. Why? Calcium is actually absorbed through, is partially broken down and absorbed in the stomach, and you need hydrochloric acid to do that. So having quality amounts of hydrochloric acid are really important for mineral breakdown. Proton pump inhibitors, antacids are all going to dumb that process down. So what does that mean? You end up with less strong stomach acid. You don't take in the things that you need at a higher level. That's going to break down your immune system. That's going to have it function abnormally, or maybe not abnormally. It's going to be overburdened, I think is a better way to put it. Glyphosate, we talked about already. Antibiotic, we know already that 30% of moms at least have high levels found in breast milk. We know it's in the drinking water, and it's roughly 10 times higher than those tested in the EU. What else? Medications, we talked about a little bit already. Remember, Western medicine saves lives in acute situations. They are the #1 saver of lives on the planet. They're also the #3 killer, because this allopathic approach, this emergency approach we've taken to chronic challenges, is causing some real issues. So what are some of the things we could do? We talked about magnesium. Now, magnesium intake would be great. That's going to be primarily leafy greens. That's going to be nuts, seeds. Sometimes fruits can have it too. But more importantly, you have to get rid of the acidic stuff, the meats, the dairies, the coffee, the refined foods, the sodas. All of these things are going to be incredibly acidic in the body. And if that is making up the primary constituents of what you're eating, you're going to run into issues. You're going to deplete your body of magnesium. And some estimates say that like 4 out of every 5 Americans have low magnesium. Nasal breathing. We talked about the stress response. Nasal breathing is one of the only ways that we can control our autonomic nervous system consciously. Get aware of it. You can check out my Breathe Easy course if you really want to. It goes through all the exercises. These are ones that I do every day. Simple. I do, even at this point, 5 minutes a day. It makes a tremendous difference, and it's something you can be cognizant of once you get in the habit of doing. Then we have the other physical, chemical, emotional stresses. So first and foremost, have a purpose and have a belief in something greater. You need to have a purpose. That purpose could be, I want to play with my grandkids. I want to play in a sports league, like a softball league. It could be whatever you want it to be. Something that you can wake up, you could write on a Post-it note or in a notebook and put it somewhere that you could see it every day, so you know that that's why you're getting up and doing the things you're doing. Maybe it's you want to start a business. It could be whatever you want it to be. We have to get rid of the stuff that is causing toxicity, the chemical foods, medications, pollutants, things of that nature. All of these things, we have to limit the load. If we're constantly putting more load in, it's going to lead to a bigger issue. Have to move the body every day. This is non-negotiable. Not everything needs to be strength training. Not everything needs to be a run, but you need to do something to move your body every day. Find a few things that work for you. This could be like a separate thing to kind of talk about, but that's huge. If you're taking medications, talk with your doctor and try to understand why you're taking the medications. Because in many cases, you can figure out what the root cause is and ultimately work with someone to get off of them. Nasal breathing, we just covered. You got to get more alkaline foods in, a lot of plants, organic if possible, and get rid of the acidic foods. We just covered that. Especially in the beginning, if your digestion's weak, I really like blending. I really like juicing to help get more nutrition in, to take some of that burden off the digestive tract. Sleep, you have to prioritize it. It's non-negotiable. And then it's about your emotional state. I like emotion code, NET, acupuncture. There's plenty of things you could do. Find one that works for you. There isn't a perfect one. You might have to try a few. You could even do what meditation can do it. Exercise, going to increase stimulation to the brain, blood supply to the brain. Actually, the more active you are, do you know that it will actually decrease your risk of things like dementia? So have to be worked on a daily basis. If you're looking to detox, if you're looking to get started with this, message me. You could set up a call with me, or you could work with me one-on-one. I do iris analyses. If you want to get started and put together a custom plan for you, I am starting something where I'm working with people in 12-week blocks to work with you on this, so that we can systematize it, make steps, work in the right direction and do it in a way where it's custom for you. So, you know, I hope this all helps. I hope this makes sense. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. I can hang around for a question or two, so but I will stop recording. So let me do that.